This is a production of O'Brien Communications.
Hi, I'm Tim O'Brien, and this is the Shaping Opinion podcast. Our guest today is Patrick Breyer. He's a self described freedom fighter, and he's a former member of the European Parliament. He served on the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice, and Home Affairs. But what I wanted to talk to Patrick about today was a new internet regulation commonly known as chat control. Under this regulation, users of apps would have to have all of their public and private messages scanned by the government as a matter of routine. Patrick, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here. And I never thought that I would interview somebody who was a member of the European Parliament. It wasn't something that I planned on, but this is really a unique thing that I'm talking to you because, separate from what we'll be talking about today, I'm very curious about the European Parliament and what it might be like for someone like you, because you have been a member of that Parliament up until last year. What was it like for you? How did you decide that you wanted to become a part of that? And was it everything that you thought it would be, or were there any surprises?
Well, I'm really passionate about our freedoms and liberties and fundamental rights, especially the right to privacy. And so I have been fighting for that as an activist for many years, especially against policies called data retention, which is essentially about collecting calling records, but also location records on the entire population. And politically, I became engaged in the Pirate Party, which is a small party in Europe that fights for fundamental rights in the digital age. And so we used to have a representative in the European Parliament called Felix Reda. And he's best known for his work on the copyright directive, on the EU copyright directive, and especially on the discussion circling around upload filters. So there was a huge controversy about EU law requiring video platforms such as YouTube to deploy upload filters to protect copyright, because this is so error-prone and unreliable. And Felix has done an amazing job, even though the directive was passed in the end. But he decided to no longer run for the European Parliament. And so I thought we must have someone there to fight for our fundamental rights. And so that's why when I heard that he's not running, I volunteered and said, let me have a go and try and defend our fundamental rights. And that's what I've been doing for those 5 years until last year.
Now, did you run for re-election, or did you decide not to run for re-election?
For private family reasons, I decided not to run for re-election. I had found an excellent person, Anya, who would have taken over my work in my office, but we didn't manage to find enough votes to be re-elected.
Now, one question I am wondering is, like, once you got to see what life was like as a member of the European Parliament, was it what you thought it would be, or were there any surprises?
I didn't have too much of an idea when I started. I think what's surprising is really how much you can achieve on specific files, because the European Parliament is very much about persons. So it matters a lot which persons are on the negotiation table on a specific file. So in the European Parliament, the legislation is negotiated by a team of so-called shadow rapporteurs, one sent from each political group. And so if you're that person, that gives you a lot of responsibility, and you can really have an impact on the Parliament's position. In the end, the Parliament will negotiate a compromise with the governments, so-called council, before the legislation becomes final. In the end, it's usually the governments that prevail. according to my experience. So the parliament doesn't have much to say. But indeed, the parliament was the institution closest to the public opinion and to the interests of the citizens. That's true. But I also found that the impact that citizens have is limited. So there is no elements of direct democracy. And on the other hand, citizens often don't even learn about the work of the European Parliament because it's not covered very much by media, only once something is decided. And then, of course, it's too late to influence policies. So I have spent my years in the Parliament to try and raise awareness and public knowledge about what's going on there and why it's important what they are negotiating. And in one instance, I actually managed, and that's the chat control file, but there were other important files where I didn't manage to explain to people why this is an important file, and the media didn't cover it either.
Would you say that would be, I'll rephrase it. What do you think was your most proud accomplishment during the time that you were a part of European Parliament?
I think the most important accomplishment was when it comes to the so-called chat control proposal that is about scanning everybody's messages with unreliable processes and exposing so-called suspicious messages to authorities. That the European Parliament took a position against this, a position that surveillance should have to be targeted, should require a judicial authority's order, that encryption must not be broken, that children under 16 should not per se be excluded from using apps or installing certain apps, that apps should be designed secure by default. And that position of the European Parliament, which was actually supported by all political groups in the end, that follows a lot what I proposed and have fought for.
Well, that is exactly what I wanted to talk to you about today, and that's what we'll be getting into. So let's start there then. It's called chat control. That's the term they use, but it's there's an acronym for it. It's the Child Sexual Abuse Regulation, CSAR. And anytime we see a regulation, whether it be anywhere in the world, Europe, America, oftentimes we look at the name of the regulation, and the name is innocuous at best. Oftentimes it sounds really good, really altruistic. So when you hear about something called Child Sexual Abuse Regulation, the automatic question is, why would anyone oppose that? Why would I? But then you start to find out a little bit more about the details, and the name may not match with exactly the things that are going on there. So if you could, let's start there. Let's talk about what CSAR regulation or chat regulation is at this point. So how would you define it from start to finish? Like, because it's probably got some good elements and some worrisome ones.
Yes, so at the outset, as you say, it is totally clear that child sexual abuse is one of the most horrible and heinous crimes that you can imagine, and everybody wants to fight it. The question is, what is the best approach to it? So what's definitely needed is a more preventive work, awareness. And the institutions where this abuse takes place need to have policies against it, to learn about it, to have communications channels, to be educated about it. And we also need to do much more on the law enforcement front, because the authorities that are to prosecute this are usually hopelessly overworked and don't have the technical equipment and the expertise needed to deal with those abuse cases sensibly. So that makes sense to work a lot more on these fronts. But that's not what this regulation is about. The idea behind this regulation, and it has been pushed by certain lobbyists and groups, the idea behind it is that technology could be used to sort of eliminate and erase child sexual abuse material That is to say, images and video depicting abuse or nudity of minors. What is illegal? The kind of material that's illegal. That it would be technically possible to just eliminate this from the virtual world by using technical filters and artificial intelligence. So the lobbyists promise we have the technology to detect this, to identify this, and to stop this from being circulated. And the way they want to do this is to actually scan and search all private conversations and chats, but also emails. When you share photos, even personal, intimate family photos, whenever you share photos, or even in private chats, they would use technology to look for possibly illegal images or videos, or to look for people trying to groom children, to chat up children for sexual purposes. And that those instances where the algorithm says this is suspicious, they would be automatically reported to an EU authority for review. That effectively means it's like opening all letters, as though the post office was opening all letters just to look. Could there be something suspicious or illegal in them? So it eliminates the privacy of correspondence because everything is searched and scanned. And also you need to eliminate end-to-end encryption, because in order to search and scan encrypted messages, and the common messaging services such as WhatsApp or Signal are end-to-end encrypted. And in order to be able to search them to these products, effectively making them insecure for all using them. Even if you use these messengers for totally legitimate purposes, you will still be scanned, and you can never be sure that the algorithm identifying suspicious images, photos, or texts will be reliable. In fact, we know that most instances of reports of those algorithms are criminally relevant, are not usable for the police, concern things like somebody was unaware of what was being posted. This is my own children. I'm reaching out to family members. I'm sending photos to my doctor. I'm sending just beach photos. I don't know. The algorithms are not reliable. They are not tested. They are not public. This is like, if you think towards the end of this idea that all private spaces should be automatically analyzed by algorithms, that would mean, opening all letters. It would also mean searching people's computers for what they have stored on their computer. It would mean implementing cameras in private apartments. They might want to react to certain sounds or something. So the idea behind this is there should be no private spaces because they can be abused. And that's an idea and a principle which we need to talk about, because if we accept this in this one context and in this one communications channel, that's an idea that will be used for other purposes, for other contexts, and in other private spaces. And is this something, a direction we want our society to go into, that there should be no private spaces or not?
That's a huge question. And I'll play devil's advocate as a starting point on that whole issue. And that is, something that I'm sure you hear quite a bit from people who are proponents of this regulation, and that is, if you have nothing to hide, why would you worry about this? In other words, if you're doing everything okay, why would you worry that the government? That's one part of the question. The other part of the question would be, if they're searching millions and millions of emails, do they really care to see, like, let's suppose you did send a picture of yourself that was sort of an intimate picture, but you were sending it to a family member like your wife. And it might not have been intimate, but let's suppose it was, you had a health report or something, and you wanted to share a picture of something that you really didn't want the world to see, but you sent it. So you do this, and you multiply that by the millions. Do you really think the government or other people care what you're doing? They're kind of desensitized to all these very personal photos, and they don't care. So that's a two-part question. One is, if you have nothing to hide, why would you worry? And the other part is, even if you do have things that you'd rather not the public see, since there's such a high volume of these images and things like this going through the government filters and algorithms, do you really think anyone's going to care?
So being placed under surveillance has a psychological effect, because if we feel that we are being watched, and be it by an algorithm, if we feel that there is a risk that our chats or photos might be seen by someone else, might not be safe, might fall in the wrong hands, then we will behave differently. That's just a psychological general effect, that if somebody watches us, we behave differently. And that's what we call the chilling effect. So normally when we chat with friends or families, but also, when whistleblowers chat with journalists, or when activists chat among each other to coordinate political action, etc. Normally, they will assume that they are private, and that that this is a private space, and that they are among themselves. But if you give them the idea that you could intrude into this chat, and that other persons could read it, could be alerted to it, then they will behave differently. They might stop to chat altogether. And in the case of a whistleblower who reports scandals, wrongdoing in their authority, they are usually threatened by losing their job because they're not allowed to divulge this information. So you can cut the public off important information if it's no longer possible to alert the media to this. In fact, even victims of child sexual abuse have told me they need these secure communications channels to reach out for help, to exchange among other victims, to reach out to police, to law enforcement, to seek help and counseling. So they themselves want to have the privacy of these communications channels, and they rely on them. So if you don't care for yourself, if you think you don't have anything to hide for yourself, think of these other people who are in need of these private channels for alerting the public, for the victims that need help, or else the example of the political activists that coordinate action that's needed for our democracy. In fact, big businesses need private communications channels for negotiations, for business deals. They are at a risk of being spied at by foreign intelligence services, such as the Chinese or the Russians. And in fact, even governments need to be able to communicate securely among each other, because they're also at risk of being spied at. And this is about war and peace. So the governments know very well how important it is to have these secure communications channels. In fact, the current proposal, chat control proposal on the table, says that security services and the military would be exempt from scanning. So when they use a WhatsApp or Signal, then they would not be scanned. And that really goes to show that they are exactly aware just how unreliable these algorithms are, because they want to be exempted. And I haven't heard them officially explain why do you want to be exempt from scanning for child sexual abuse material if this technology works as well as you say? Why should the military be exempt from that? They don't explain it, but they write it in the text.
That's probably to be expected. I have a question for you about human nature, because to get where you are, you have to have spent a lot of time thinking about it. Why do you think people are so willing? Because I would have to think, in fact, more than that, I've done a lot of reading on this on Europe, and I'm amazed at how pro-regulation that the European media is. And it's not that they really want to regulate things, but how easily swayed they are that this is going to be nothing but a benefit to the people. And I'm thinking, whatever happened to the cynical media? Whatever happened to the media that challenges things on face value? Well, my question for you really is about human nature, though, here, and that is, why do you think it is that people are so willing to trust the government and trust new technologies like this and think that there's not as much downside as you see?
This is something very difficult to bear, that there are spaces that are being abused by criminals, and there is technology that could help in certain cases, and why don't we use all means at our disposal to protect children? I mean, what could be more important? So it's something initially where you would be willing to go very far. On the other hand, if you think about it, what are appropriate means? Would it be appropriate, I don't know, to use the death penalty? There is some thinking about that in the US, to use torture. So to what length would you be willing to go to protect children? And most of all, what's most important to me is, does this really protect children and save them from abuse? And I'm convinced that it does not, actually, because what these filters do, and large US companies are already using them voluntarily, such as, when you use Gmail, when you use a Facebook Messenger, your chats and your messages will already be scanned by voluntary filtering. But does this protect children from abuse? What happens is, first of all, you flood law enforcement with an unimaginable number of reports. So in a European country, you would see hundreds of thousands of reports generated from suspicious images, videos, or chats, which need to be reviewed. So in fact, a unit of 70 police officers in Germany are saying that they are totally booked out with checking those reports, and they don't have time for undercover investigations in the circles and in the platforms of those actually committing the abuse. So what's being investigated is the sharing of material, possibly illegal material in some cases, on platforms, but you prosecute those sharing it. In many cases, actually, it's minors, it's persons under 18 years of age that are being investigated for this because they don't know what they are doing. In most cases, there is no criminal intent behind it. And really, they haven't been able to tell me how often did these reports that are coming in voluntarily by now, how often did they result in actually rescuing children? And they haven't been able to give me numbers, and I think that only by chance, very exceptionally, could this really happen. In fact, there is one recent case where a network, a terrible group of people harassing minors and teenagers to hurt themselves or even commit suicide, etc. And there's one member of that being prosecuted in Hamburg. He was prosecuted for child sexual abuse material several years ago, and didn't get a fine really, and just continued with his activity of driving other teenagers into death, because he was only prosecuted for the material, but they didn't even notice what he had been doing there. So the way to go after the perpetrators of child sexual abuse, who are actually abusing children, who are recording this material and producing it in the first place, the way to do that is to intrude their communications channels and their own groups. And they use very secure platforms, of course, and closed platforms, closed chats. They don't use Facebook Messenger, and they don't use Gmail. What they will use is platforms on the dark net, for instance, or else encrypted communications channels. So the police found that in those groups, what they do typically is they upload material in an encrypted archive. They uploaded it to commercial hosting services on the internet, and then on their dark net platform, on their closed platform, which they operate themselves, they will share the links and the passwords to this material. So that means that scanning won't work, because the platform which they operate themselves will not scan, will not implement any legal requirements. And the hosting service is totally unaware of what this encrypted archive contains. And an encrypted archive can also not be scanned for signatures for known material, because it's encrypted. And so the scanning doesn't work for those circles actually producing the material. In order to investigate and bust these platforms, what the police needs to do is undercover investigation. So they need to become members of these circles, or else take over the account of somebody who is a member already. And that requires a lot of work on the part of law enforcement. It takes a lot of personal capacity. But if you flood them with hundreds and thousands of reports, and most of them are false, there are statistics according to which most of them, or even 3/4 of them, are not relevant to the police work, cannot be followed up. So you swamp them with reports, you make them prosecute those people sharing and distributing the material, but you lack the capacities to go after those producing it. And that's what you have to do. If you want to protect children, you need to go after the perpetrator is actually committing the abuse and actually producing this material. And that's why I say, let's focus all resources on going after these. With the remaining resources, we can prosecute the distribution further down the line. But the only way to stop the system is to prevent the criminals from abusing children and from producing the material in the first time. So you need to go after those people, and the scanners are not the way to do this and to protect children.
You said a couple of things I wanted to come back to, and one of them was about the kids themselves. You said you weren't so sure that this chat regulation would protect kids, and kids can be their own worst enemies themselves, is what you pretty much said. Because if you have a teenage kid who's taking pictures that he or she should not be taking and sending that they should not be sending, any adult with good judgment wouldn't do that, but these are kids, and they have access to a smartphone, and they do things that they would regret later. That's all possible. And it's also one of those things that you're saying, if you're trying to screen, if you're for this regulation and you're trying to screen for improper visual images, well, a lot of the people that are generating that content are the kids themselves. A lot of the people that are sharing it are the kids themselves. They're not protecting themselves, but again, they're kids. They don't know any better. So I think that's a huge point that you made. But then there's this other one I wanted to ask you about, because I think it's what people may not realize. And that is, if I'm a user of Gmail, if I use Gmail, and if I use it in the United States, are my messages already being screened in this way?
Yes, they are. And also, if you use Facebook Messenger, they are being screened by these algorithms and then reported to law enforcement, depending on where you are located. If both users are in the United States, that will be reported to NCMEC, the National Center for Exploited and Missing Children, and they will then refer it on to the law enforcement authorities for further action. About what you said earlier about how does this harm kids. So in Germany, in my country, 40% of investigations for possession of child sexual abuse material target children under the year of under 18 years of age. And the reason is that either they complain about certain photos oftentimes, how can you post something like that, and then they share it themselves. Maybe they are a member in a group where this is posted because somebody finds it funny. So if only you receive something in a group, you may have wanted it or not, you will be reported. Many times they find this kind of stuff funny. So for instance, there is this video of a minor having sex with a mule in Afghanistan, I read there as an example, or there is this boy who was stung in the genitals by a bee. So this is stuff that people will find funny, but in fact, because it depicts, genitals of minors, it is illegal material. But children don't know this and don't understand this. So they might share this because they think it's funny. And this kind of material is often shared hundreds of thousands or millions of times in social networks, and then they keep reporting it to the police, and this is why you can be investigated. And if only you're being investigated, even if it turns out at the end that there was no criminal intent, or that this is not the story about the father who posted a photo of his boy's genitals to a doctor. So this was detected by the scanners and reported to the police. And of course, in the end, they said this is not criminal because you're allowed to do this. But he lost access to all of his services, to all of his data on Google, because they canceled all of his accounts. And the investigation itself can result in breaking your marriage. You could lose your job if neighbors learn about the police questioning you, etc. So people have committed suicide because they have been investigated for this, even if it was unfounded. This can have terrible consequences. And as for the children, I don't think criminalization is the way to make them aware of that why this is illegal, etc. I think this is something that they should be educated on. And in fact, in the European Parliament, we commissioned a poll among minors, among teenagers, to ask them what do they think of having their communication scanned. Do they think that this makes them safer online? And a huge majority, more than 90%, said this will not work. I don't want this. I don't want to be protected in this way. What teenagers said they wanted is, first of all, they want to be able to block contacts. They want to be able to report certain people, and they want these reports to be followed up and to be taken seriously if people are sneaking up them. And secondly, they wanted to be educated about the methods that are used online for grooming. Because, teenagers keep getting caught up in these sextortion and whatever is happening online, and they need to understand. You don't know who you're chatting with. You don't know who this person is. What are the methods that are commonly used, and how can I protect myself? This is what teenagers say they want to learn more about to protect themselves, not the elimination of the privacy of their communications.
It seems like they're using a shotgun approach instead of a rifle approach. They're just spreading it around and trying to catch everybody. Or to use another analogy, they're using this large net instead of going after just one at a time of people that sort of are suspicious. I wanted to go back to sort of the underlying thing that we haven't talked about yet, but you've kind of inferred in the beginning, and that is that we're talking about child sexual exploitation here. That's the main focus. That's the main justification for the chat regulation. But as you know, and this is what you kind of inferred, was once you give the government certain powers to do one thing, to solve one problem, there isn't even a question of a procedure. In other words, you can have some bureaucrat with the authority to look at these algorithms and determine what to do as a follow-up for child sexual abuse. If that person has a slow day, it's nothing for them to look at other things that have nothing to do with sexual abuse and see what they can do to expand their powers. Have you talked to people about that, and what have you said to them about that issue of, I guess you would call it mission creep? That's a term we use for something like that. You start with one thing, and the mission sort of expands and expands and expands, and then you wonder 5 years later how we got here. What have you said about that?
You know, this EU chat control proposal is pretty much unprecedented in the entire world. So no other democracy has a system where it would be mandatory to search and scan all private conversations, and even to break encryption to be able to do that. This is not something we have anywhere else in the world, except for China. In China, if you use their communication services as a Chinese citizen, like WeChat, they will scan for your chats, but they won't scan for criminal content, or not only, but we know that they scan for political purposes, you know, mentioning the student protests, Hong Kong, making fun of the president, of the Chinese president, using cartoons to make fun of them. This is stuff that they will scan and report for. And even in the EU, we know that they are already looking at expanding this. The initial purpose would be finding child sexual abuse material and exploitation material. But Europol, so the European Police Office, has already called for expanding this, because they would want to search for other criminal offenses and material. And in fact, even the Five Eyes, so that is an alliance of intelligence agencies of several countries. Even the Five Eyes have issued an official statement supporting the proposal, because if for the first time the EU managed to break end-to-end encryption, then of course the intelligence agencies would love that. They've been trying to do that for so many years. Because, as you know, countries like the US are using mass surveillance on communications already. But where end-to-end encryption is used, they will not be able to penetrate it so far. But if the EU is successful in requiring to scan messages on device, the so-called client-side scanning, so scanning everything before it's being encrypted, then, of course, the intelligence agencies could use the same mechanism and require the operators to scan also for whatever interests them, for economic intelligence, for political intelligence, meetings going on, whatever the intelligence agencies like to monitor. And it's clear that this policy would be expanded, and it would not only be used in Europe by democracies, but the autocratic regimes would be the first to jump on this and require operators to also break their encryptions for their purposes, and they will no longer look at protecting children only. They will look for political purposes and whatever they do to suppress democracy, activists, and the opposition in their countries. So it's very clear that it would go this way.
That's interesting. There's, if people are wondering how this plays out, it's sometimes happens already without the aid of technology like this. But and I'll use the United States as an example. It depends on who's in power, and then you also give them access to information. So let's suppose it's a Democrat Party in power, and they have certain positions on guns, and they have certain positions on climate change, and they have certain positions on other things. And I'm sending a text to my brother-in-law about how I don't believe climate change. And it's innocuous, it's harmless, it's certainly legal, and I send it to my brother-in-law, and it's a private message, and I have no fear, or I send it, on email on some service, but it's now you throw the government layer in there that's tracking that, and they can keyword search with algorithms. They don't need human beings to do this. So If I say climate change is BS, and that's what the term I use, I can say the companies can set up a search for that. So there might be 1 million people that said climate change is BS, and all 1 million people get funneled into another algorithm to screen their things and find out what else they say. Nothing bad happens to them in a criminal sense, but all of a sudden you know, you don't know it even, but all of a sudden, you know, the Democrats or the people who are against climate change have you on lists of a person who might be an opponent to that. So let's say you apply for a job or for that within that government, or you're getting a tax audit all of a sudden out of the blue, and you're wondering why. And it's not that any human being handed your papers over. It wasn't that personal. It was that your name was just on a list, and you got and you ended up in a database that somehow got channeled, and someone in a central location said, yeah, all those people that are against climate change, let's subject them to a tax audit. You know, and all of a sudden you end up having a tax audit. You have no idea why, and you'll never be informed. But it might have been an innocuous text. Now that's the nightmare scenario for people to talk about this. I can flip it around, because I'm sure people who are listening to this right now are going to say, well, that's a conspiracy theory. But if I flip it around and say, well, what if you don't believe climate change, and now you're in charge of the government, and all of these climate change activists end up on those same lists, and the same government uses the same tax powers, and all of a sudden you have climate change activists who are being targeted by the IRS and getting tax audits. I'm not saying it's going to happen just to one side and it's just going to be perpetuated by one side. What I'm saying is this sort of technological power in the hands of anybody can be really terribly used, and it can be expanded from child sexual abuse to these various issues till it gets to the point where the government just basically says, who are our enemies and how can we use this technology to go after them? And can we give them tax audits? Can we put them on lists? Can we make it harder for them to fly? Because anytime they go to the airport now, they're going to go through extra screening. All these various ways, because so much of it is centralized now. And I think that's what you're worried about, isn't it?
Yeah, in Europe there are well-documented cases of governments going after their political opponents or even journalists by using spyware. So by infecting their personal smartphones and spying on them. In the US, it's well known that the administration is vetting people for loyalty to the president. So it has happened quite often that people were dismissed who were found to be disloyal. So they will be very interested in this kind of material to evaluate this. But also, if you want to visit a country and you want to travel there, there are also processes of searching currently your social media accounts, but it could of course also be your devices, your private chats, etc., for certain keywords or for your political opinion. And your political opinion or criticism of a government can be sufficient to say you won't be allowed to travel here. There are lots of people on no-fly lists that have never committed anything illegal. There are lots of people in police databases who may only have been close to some protest or some riot or something, but not actually been involved in it. But nonetheless, you are on those lists. And so, not committing any crime or behaving legally does not keep you safe from disadvantages of these kinds. And so that's to those who think that not having anything to hide will prevent you from harm. That is not. You're not a criminal. Whatever you have done or are suspected of having done can still be used against you. And anyway, if you're in an important position, if you are a politician or a judge or whoever, having access to their private conversations, etc., can be used to blackmail them. And this is something in a democracy that we should protect our office holders from being, subject to blackmail by other authorities, access to their private data. The famous Cardinal Richelieu in France said, give me 7 lines written by a person and I will find something in them to hang them. And so I'm sure that access to private communications, photos and videos will give whoever is looking for it enough information to be able to blackmail even the highest ranking officials.
And you can take things out of context, and that goes back to something else. We have a term in America that criminal lawyers will use. Prosecutors will say, that, and defense attorneys will say that in America, basically, you can convict a ham sandwich if you want to, because all you need to do is arrange the charges and the facts in a certain way and omit whatever you need to omit to make your case. I have faith in the justice system ultimately that we get it right more often than we don't, because there is due process, but it can be pretty messy. And I think that gets to this issue, because when we talk about a justice system, there are checks and balances. But when you talk about this regulation, you're going right to the chase. You have an algorithm sort of making the first judgment on a person. And once the algorithm kicks the process in, it's hard to turn it around. It's hard for someone to have a sane voice and say, well, I don't think the algorithm got it right. You have to sort of pursue it to its logical end. And like you said earlier, oftentimes that means that they find out that it's really not a problem, but you still have to go through this heart-wrenching process. Some people don't survive it because it's so stressful to them. And so go ahead.
Maybe, Tim, I can explain more specifically what these algorithms are supposed to be doing. So first of all, they're supposed to look for so-called known material. So these are images and videos that have been classified before. And already there, many reports are false or not criminally relevant, because the algorithm cannot tell your intent. So if you share material, you might receive it without criminal intent, or you might not know that this is illegal. Also, the algorithm looking for known material cannot know the exact laws of the country. So the criminal laws, including on child sexual abuse material, vary from one country to another, for example, when it comes to cartoons, etc. And so even those material classified in the past, when they are recognized, do not reliably know whether somebody has committed a crime or not and should be referred or not. But then it goes further. The EU regulation, the proposed regulation, would also require companies to use classifiers, including artificial intelligence, to look for, to screen unknown material. So even if no human has ever reviewed a material, then automated classifiers would be used to decide whether an image or a video has something in common with classified material. And this is even more unreliable, because no algorithm can reliably know the age of a person that might be shown nude or not. I know it might be a statute or whatever. These algorithms are used by some companies, but they are totally experimental. They've never released them for public review. So no scientific institution has been able to independently evaluate them, just how reliable these are. Reliability also depends a lot on the configuration on them. The regulation doesn't say anything on this. And so this is untested and unreliable technology. And if you use it, for example, if a law enforcement institution uses it because they have seized this hard drive of a criminal suspect, and they use this to search the hard drive and classify it for material that should be reviewed, I'm fine with it. That's legitimate. But if you use these algorithms on the entire population, even a small rate of false positives used on so many people will mean that you get thousands and hundreds of thousands of false positives, because the amount of material you are screening is so huge. And in fact, even if you have a false positive ratio of 0.01% used on everybody communications, this will still mean that you get 1,000,000 times more false positives than true positives, just because of the vast amounts of material that it is used on. And so the idea is horrible, that algorithms could, with any measure of reliability, scan and classify something as suspicious or not, that they have never seen before.
One of the things that in my work, I do public relations work, and I get involved with the AI issue. And one of the ethical questions when it comes to AI is who's responsible, because in all of civilization up until now, if something happened where a decision was made, you could blame the person who made that decision. And because of human nature, nobody wants to get blamed for something bad that happens. It could be, if someone left the door open and thieves got in, and all of a sudden, or somebody made a bad decision and their computer got hacked and the whole company got a virus. These kinds of things can happen, and they do. And one of the big incentives for it not to happen is that you don't want to be at fault. You don't want to be the person who gets blamed for that happening. So everybody's a little bit more buttoned down in their work or in what they do in their daily lives, because they don't want to pay the consequence. Now, all of a sudden, AI has this capability to make decisions, and it can make the wrong decisions just like people. But the problem is nobody's accountable for those decisions. And so it's very easy for people to say, let's put all, especially people in government, policymakers, to say, let's let AI make that choice. Let the algorithms make those decisions. That way I can wash my hands and I'm clean of this. You can't blame me. We can all blame this inhuman algorithm for the problem. It wasn't my fault. So it puts a little distance between the people who are creating the problem and the problem itself, don't you think?
I think so. Among teenagers, there's something called sexting, where they just voluntarily share nude images among each others, which is part of their development, I guess. And I think parents should care to keep them safe, and should make sure that this material doesn't fall in the wrong hands. So if there are algorithms flagging this material, which they meant to send to a close friend, which they know very well, but then actually it is being sent to some moderator of a social media company, I don't know where they are based, in the Philippines or wherever, this actually creates new material that should never have been created, and it exposes them to the wrong persons. They can earn money by selling this kind of stuff. It doesn't belong in the hands of anybody else, and it's not safe there. Even if it's family photos, if it's your own adult nudes, whatever, you have a right that intimate material should be private, and it's not safe in anybody else's hands, and it doesn't belong there.
I have two more questions for you. One is, who ultimately gets to determine what's appropriate and what isn't? Because I talked about mission creep before going to other offenses, but let's just talk about this child sexual abuse stuff. I mean, there's an old saying, I know it when I see it, but the question is, who's looking at it and how are they judging it? Because you can look at something that is innocuous to most people. I use that term enough today, innocuous, but you can use something that is genuinely harmless, but another person might look at it and decide it's unsafe or it violates the policy. Who gets to decide what is a violation of this CSAR Act and what isn't?
So, in first instance, it's the algorithm that will identify material that will then be referred to an EU authority. They will have to refer it on to the national authority unless it is clearly legal. Then the national authority will again filter out stuff which they can clearly say is not relevant. In Germany, it would then be sent to a local prosecutor's office, they will again look at it and assess it and decide on whether to open an investigation or not. And if they do, then it will ultimately up to the court, to the judges to decide, is this legal or not. It's not only a decision based on the material, but it's also a decision based on the intent. Did they do this intentionally? There are certain circumstances where it can be legal to handle this material. For example, the defense lawyer would have to handle it. Law enforcement authorities will have to handle it. If a pediatric needs it for medical purposes, it can be illegal. So these are all things that need to be decided. In fact, parents of children have been prosecuted because they wanted to alert, for example, the director of their child's school to something going on and saying, this is being shared in the chat group. Can you do something about it? And as soon as you share it, no matter for which purpose, it's already, you can be prosecuted. So even though the decision is up to the judge and ultimately you would be cleared whenever you didn't act intentionally, the procedure and the investigation itself can have disastrous consequences on your life. And anyways, even if you're not flagged, even the fear that you might be has a chilling effect. And I think that would be extremely harmful to our society and to communications freedom and to free speech online also. So the proposal would be the end to the privacy of digital correspondence. And it would be the end of secure encryption online. And that is something you should care about, whether for yourself or for others who are in need of it.
Sometimes the process itself is the punishment. So even if you're cleared in the end, you have to go through this terrible process, and that's the punishment, maybe a worse punishment than whatever else could happen. My final question for you is assuming that there's a world without the CSAR, the one that we've had, the one that we have right now, what would you say is the best way to protect children from any of this online stuff? Because it is definitely a risk. I mean, we absolutely need to protect children from the kind of things that the CSAR says it's trying to protect them against. So what would you offer up as an alternative solution?
Yes, so that brings me back to my initial statement. I think we need to do much better in the area of prevention, because we know that 90% of cases of child sexual abuse are actually committed by people they know close to them, be it family, be it educational authority or in the sports club or whatever. And so all these institutions must have policies to detect and prevent this, and have channels open for seeking help for children and teenagers who are affected. We need to do much more in the area of law enforcement, because they are not well equipped. There are no standard procedures and policies to deal with those investigations. And maybe most of all, or the newest thing we can do, and that's something that the European Parliament proposes as an alternative, is to use technology to educate our kids and to empower them. So currently, for commercial reasons, on some networks, your profile is public by default once you open it, or you can be contacted by default by anybody. Sometimes even on online games, etc., they can send you both text messages and also images unsolicited without you seeking it out. Which is horrible. I'm convinced, and that's what we propose, that the user should be asked about their level of visibility, what they want to see. And they could also be asked, if the algorithm says this might contain nudity, they could be asked, do you want to see this? This may contain nudity. That's something that some companies are also already deploying, this technology. They could be asked before sharing their phone number. These are the risks. Do you really want to do this? Or their private address. And my conviction is that these protections should not only be used on children, but on everybody. We don't need age verification, but everybody should have a right to private settings by default and secure technology by default, about being empowered and being given choices and information and helping themselves. Because as I said, when we asked teens what do they want, this is exactly what they asked for, to have reporting, that their reporting should be taken seriously, and that they want to be educated to be able to protect themselves.
Patrick Breyer, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
The Shaping Opinion podcast is a production of O'Brien Communications, copyright O'Brien Communications 2025. Find us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you like to watch, go to YouTube, Rumble, or our Substack page, shapingopinion.com.